Hi, it's Agnes, and this is a manifesting story, and it comes from the book Moments of Grace by Neale Walsch. He's the man that wrote Conversations with God, and this is the best story I have ever heard about anyone manifesting a house. So I'm going to read it for you now. It's called There Are Many Mansions. So, Bill Tucker learned the lesson of faith 30 years ago, a lesson he has never forgotten. He has called upon it many times to remind himself that nothing is impossible. Only one thing is required: belief. In those days, Bill had never sold a house, although he had an agent's license and managed a real estate office. He would often stay late in the evenings to be available to the agents coming in from their evening showings. It was his responsibility to review the offers to purchase, and he didn't want to hold up any deals or lose any by not being available on the spot. 10 o'clock, however, was late enough for any office to be open. He decided one night as he glanced at his watch and yawned. "I'm heading home," he told himself. "I'm calling it a night." But then he heard voices coming from the front of the office. "I must have forgotten to lock the door," he told himself as he rose to investigate. "I'm sorry," he apologized to the young couple he found standing at the counter. "The office is closed." They were a diminutive pair. She was barely 5 foot tall, and he only slightly higher. Two small children hovered shyly behind them. "Well, the lights are on," she added sweetly. "And you're here, aren't you?" "Yes," Bill answered, "but you see, I'm the manager, not an agent. I'm just waiting for the agents to return so that I can close up for the night. We're the Johnsons, Ted and Amy. We need to buy a home tonight, so you will have to help us." She insisted. "Why tonight, Mrs. Johnson?" Bill asked. She took a breath. "Because we have to move in tomorrow." It was all Bill could do to stop from rolling his eyes. "That's impossible, madam," he smiled patiently. "First of all, even if you were to find a house you like at this time of the night, we would have to submit an offer to the owner. Then we'd have to wait for a possible counter offer, and after that, you have to apply to the bank for a mortgage. The house has to be appraised, and the bank must qualify you. There is absolutely no way you can move into a house in less than 6 weeks." That should explain it adequately enough, he thought. People never failed to amaze Bill. He chuckled inwardly. Did she actually think she could march in here at 10 o'clock at night and get anywhere with this ridiculous notion? He opened his mouth to suggest that perhaps she should come back tomorrow so that he could introduce her to an agent who might be able to help her. But Mrs. Johnson apparently had other ideas. "Oh, it won't be any problem at all. We'll be able to buy a house tonight," she said. Okay, Bill thought. Maybe they have a cash for the house. That, of course, would certainly expedite the process. "Oh, why is that?" he asked politely in response. "Because I asked God to give us a home by morning, and he never lets me down." "I see. Well, even if you had an agent available, it's way too late tonight to look at anything." She didn't seem to get his point. "You are licensed, aren't you?" she persisted. Bill answered that he was, "But I've never sold a home, and I'm not expert enough at this for you to trust." "You believe in God, don't you?" Bill smiled indulgently. "Sure, on that issue there's no question, but," she interrupted, "do you believe in miracles?" "Well, yeah." Bill had in fact experienced many of what he considered to be amazing occurrences in his life. Mrs. Johnson drew herself up and stuck out her chest and said, "Look, I prayed today and I asked God to give me a home. Can we just sit down?" Bill nodded, pointing to a couple of seats in front of an agent's desk. He sat in the chair behind it. "I asked God," the woman went on, "to give us a home that we could move into by morning." Bill's eyebrows shot up. "We have nowhere to live," Mrs. Johnson said simply. "We thought we had bought a house on contract from a little old lady here in the city that agreed to finance it for us. We're from about 200 miles north, but my husband just found a job here, so we packed up and moved. When we arrived, the lady wasn't out yet, and when we asked her when she would be leaving, she said she wasn't going to be leaving. She thought she was making a deal with us to live with her. So she put us in her basement." Bill whistled softly, shaking his head. That's a very strange tale, he offered. In 20 years in business, he'd heard lots of horror stories, but this one qualified for a place near the top of the list. Mrs. Johnson continued, "Of course we can't live in this lady's basement. We have our children here. We've been washing daily at the gas station restroom down the street. Tonight I asked God for a miracle because we can't go on like this. So we've been driving around looking for an open real estate office, and here you are." Through the front window, Bill could see the couple's old beat-up car in the parking lot. "How much money do you have for a down payment?" He almost didn't want to hear the answer. "Oh, we don't have any money at all. Ted has been unable to work for the past 10 years. You see, he's a recovering alcoholic. And we're getting a new start, but it's not easy. I've been working part-time as a waitress." This situation is getting worse, Bill thought. How in the world do they think they can buy a home with no money? "You've been supporting your family on a waitress salary? Why were you only working part-time?" Bill wondered out loud. "I had to," Mrs. Johnson explained, "in order to volunteer at my church. That's really important to me. But we get by, that's not the problem. The problem is we have nowhere to live, and you know, we're not picky. We'll take the least expensive house we can find." "Why don't you just find a place to rent?" Bill suggested. "Get back on your feet, put some money together and save for a place." "We've been renting for years," the woman dismissed. "It's time we had a place of our own, and we can, with God's help. Look how he brought us to you." Yeah, well, good luck, lady, Bill thought. At the same time, he was intrigued by the woman's strong faith she was exhibiting, and, he mused, who was he to interfere with her miracle? He took out his multiple listings book. Might as well look at least to see what there is, he told himself with an inward sigh. "Well, here's one for $54,000. It's not the nicest part of town, but it's a pretty low price. How much will your husband make at his new job?" Mr. Johnson had been quiet up until this point, but now he spoke up. "I'm darn lucky to have a job at all. I'm starting as a janitor tomorrow, making $6 an hour." Bill looked askance at both of them. "That's not much," he observed. Getting out his calculator, he punched in a few numbers. "Less than $12,500 a year." This is an American book, so that's American dollars. The man nodded. Bill said, "The most you can afford on that salary is a $36,000 house. There just aren't any houses in that price range. And even if there were, the bank is going to require a down payment. All of this is very unlikely, Mr. and Mrs. Johnson." "But you said you believe in miracles," Mrs. Johnson said quietly. "Yes," Bill smiled meekly, "but I didn't say I could perform them." The couple only stared at him. "Okay," he thought, "I'll just have to prove how impossible this is going to be." He picked up the phone and dialed the realtor listing the house he'd just talked about. "We'll make an offer," he said, but he already knew what the outcome would be. The realtor was delighted with the call at first. Bill saw from the listings book that the house had been on the market for over a year. So he expected this reaction, but when the realtor heard that the offer was $36,000, Bill got the second reaction that he expected. She became indignant. Bill had to insist that she convey the offer to the owner, reminding her of the law stated that all bona fide offers must be presented. A few months later, the realtor called back. A few moments later, not months, the realtor called back. The owner had a counteroffer, she said. Less annoyed now. At least some kind of deal seemed possible. "It's a good one, $45,000. I think you should take it." "Thank you," Bill replied sincerely, "but let me explain the situations here. My client have no money put aside, and they earn no money to speak of. They'll be lucky to find a bank that will loan them $36,000, much less $45,000. We'll keep the negotiations going with a reply of $36,500. "I'm sure my owner won't accept that," the woman realtor said matter-of-factly. Bill replied, "You don't have the right to make that assessment. You're required to present our counter offer." He was starting to get into the spirit of things. This might be an interesting exercise after all. The realtor rang back in 5 minutes. "I've made the offer and the owners are willing to have me show the house. We think that when the buyers see it, they will want to meet our price." "I don't think they can," Bill told her again. "I've seen stranger things happen," the selling realtor said. "Let's show the house." "Okay," Bill agreed and said goodbye. He told the Johnsons what was up. They just sat there smiling. Bill could hardly believe they'd even gotten that far. Of course, in the morning they would all understand the futility of this exercise, but that was part of the real estate business. They were nice people. He was willing to go through the process with them until they got the picture. The next morning, as Bill drove to the house, he was unhappily imagining what it would be most probably look like. It was, after all, the cheapest house on the market and in the very worst part of town. The street was full of potholes. Abandoned cars, unkept lawns were everywhere. Bill sighed as he pulled up to a modest front gate. The selling realtor was waiting for him, the Johnsons standing with her looking hopeful. He dreaded how sad they were going to be. Bill was glad his job didn't usually entail selling houses and having to sometimes be the instrument of people's disappointment. As the realtor swung open the gate, Bill caught his breath. The little house was lovely. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson smiled broadly. It was an adorable red and white Cape Cod, complete with dormers and shutters on all the windows. When they entered through the front door, Bill noted the new carpet and linoleum. All the woodwork had been stripped and stained, and there were new appliances and brand new cabinetry in the tiny kitchen. The house was immaculate and fully decorated with new furniture which was going with this house in all the rooms. It was a jewel. "We'll take it," Mrs. Johnson blurted out happily. "Great, let's drive over to the owner's home and conclude the negotiations," the realtor beamed. The little party caravanned its way out of the slum-like neighbourhood into a lovely suburb, pulling up to a spacious ranch. The troop was met at the front door by a big bear of a man dressed in overalls. "Good day to you. I'm George Rockwell." He greeted them warmly and led them into a cheery kitchen where his wife was pouring coffee for everyone. When they were settled in chairs, Mr. Rockwell looked at Mr. Johnson and looked at him square in the eye. "What's the matter with you, mister? Why aren't you willing to provide at least the minimum basic house for your family at a reasonable price?" "Well, sir," started Mr. Johnson, looking down at his cup, "I am willing. My realtor here says I can't afford any more." He was having difficulty with Rockwell's confrontive approach. He went on, "I am a recovering alcoholic. I've been unemployed for the last 10 years, but I'm sober now, and I just got a new job over at the Harshfinger plant." Mr. Rockwell looked surprised. "Harshfinger? Who hired you over there?" "A nice fella by the name of Rogers, Charlie Rogers." Rockwell stood up and extended his hand. "You can have the house for $36,500. Bill almost choked on his coffee. "Excuse me?" he interrupted as soon as he caught his breath. "We're not even sure we can find a bank to give them a loan." "No problem," came the answer. "I'll finance it myself." "Mr. Rockwell," Bill continued, "this buyer hasn't even been qualified." "Just who are you representing, Mr. Tucker?" the owner of the house now asked. Then his voice softened. "Look, I just retired from Harshfinger's maintenance department after 36 years. Charlie Rogers came to me 15 years ago, a reformed alcoholic. I took a chance on him and he worked out just fine. If this man's good enough for Charlie, he's good enough for me. I'm giving him the house for his price right here and now." Now, the two realtors looked at each other in disbelief. Second cups of coffee were offered all round, and Rockwell began telling the story of the house that was soon to belong to Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, a house, it turned out, that was very dear to his heart. His father had built the home, and George Rockwell lived here his entire life, marrying and eventually raising his own family in this dwelling. He had done all the remodeling work himself. His wife had picked out the carpet and the new furniture, and the only reason he and Mrs. Rockwell felt compelled to finally move was that they wanted to invest their money in something a little more substantial, something that would produce a greater return down the line. Since their son, who suffered from Down syndrome, would have ongoing financial needs even after their death. The Johnsons were glowing now, and as the morning sun poured through the windows, Bill felt a little tear squeeze out from the corner of his eye, even as he noticed the selling realtor dabbing at her mascara. "Can we move in today?" Amy Johnson inquired hopefully. Rockwell reached into the pocket of his overalls and pulled out a set of keys. "Be my guest," he grinned, and put them in Mrs. Johnson's hand. She looked over at Bill and winked. He winked back. So this is what selling homes and what life is about. He thought, just one miracle after another. Whew. That story gets me every time. It is the most brilliant story of faith and belief. So wanted to read you that for the last 3 or 4 months, but that book of mine has been in storage and I had to go to my mum's and dig it out of a box in the garage to let you have a listen to it. So, and that's come in perfectly timing-wise with the other 2 YouTube viewers wanting to have a meditation about manifesting a home. It all ties in very nicely. So, manifest your home. Say to yourself, I am a wonderful homeowner and I have a beautiful home, a beautiful house, exactly where I want to live. And just launch in your imagination, living in the end. I am also going to put in the description the Living in the End YouTubes so you can revisit them to work out how to set up a Living in the End home imaginal scene. You can also use the YouTube I just did around manifesting your perfect home. So enjoy, 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 and lots of love to you. Moving into beautiful spaces with beautiful furniture in amazing locations around the world in countries that are absolutely exquisite to live in. Lots of love, and I will see you in the next one.